is going to pop off, and then you're going to lose one, potentially two wheels if you're connecting them in tank systems. And if not, then you could easily break your chain as well, depending on the strength of the chain and how much pressure was put onto it. But you don't want to lose your chain in the middle of a heat. So make sure that the parts that are keeping them aligned, if it's a collar or whatever the case may be, they have to be accessible in the final product, not just when you're assembling it. So obviously they're accessible when you're assembling it, or else it won't go together. But make sure if you do have a shaft collar that's on a hex shaft, that it's facing somewhere that you have access, so that between rounds you can say, okay, is it aligned? No, I can loosen it with an Allen key. I can actually fit my Allen key in there and get it back to where it's supposed to be. So you want to make sure that maintenance is possible, and that all of your components that require maintenance are going to be easily checked.
And one of the biggest mistakes I've seen when designing your base and your drive system is having just one shaft sticking out supported right where the motor is, and then your wheels are a few inches away from that support. That design isn't necessarily bad, but what I've seen happen a lot is that forces a lot on the shafts. The shafts end up bending. So wherever there's somewhere where there's force applied, then it's generally a good idea to have a support on each side of your gear or your wheel, whatever system, even your motor is being built, because all that weight, especially if you have a ramp on the playing field or something like that, that weight can be multiplied many times over, or even just when picking up and taking the robot off of the field. A lot of people don't think about that, but sometimes the robot's heavy and it gets dropped. If it gets dropped from a foot high and say the robot's 100 pounds, that's a lot of force being applied on those shafts. So the more they're supported, the less chance you have of breaking something.
All right. So utilization of motors and mechanisms are logical and appropriate for the task at hand. So you need to make sure that you're choosing the correct motor. I've already been in a situation where there was a lovely debate on which motor to use. Basically, you have to decide, do you want speed or do you want force? And that is a big concession that you might be forced to make. In some cases, for a drive system, for example, the logical answer is, well, we want speed, because you want your robot to be able to move fast. But if your robot's moving faster, that means that there's a possibility that your motor is not right for how heavy your robot is.
Not as strong as it should be.
Yeah. Want to talk about gear ratios?
Yeah, that's it. The easiest application of gear ratios, at least in this competition, is the Bainbot motors, which are mostly used for heavy lifting, drive, things like that. They'll be written on them, say 256 to 1, 64 to 1, 32 to 1, whatever. Basically the first number and the last number, just the larger the difference between them, it'll be the slower it goes. So 256 to 1 means that the motor internally has to spin 256 times for the output shaft to turn once, which is very, very strong, but ends up, I believe, on a regular sized Vex wheel, it's like 5 RPM, something like that. It's very, very slow, but I can guarantee you, you will not be able to stop it by hand. So you need to decide, based on the weight of your robot, and again, how many motors, all the friction, what gear ratio you need. Usually, honestly, it ends up being usually around 64 to 1, but there are times when there's a ramp or when you have to push something that you would need a heavier ratio. One thing that you have to keep in mind as well is that certain motors that you would use do have a stall force, which means that at a certain point that the force is applied, the motor just kind of gives up to protect itself. The black motors are a good example of that. Those motors, after a certain point, they just stop driving so that they don't burn themselves. The Bainbot motors are a lot better at that. They will keep going usually until the gearbox breaks, which obviously you don't want a gearbox to break, but if you want to change your motor or you want your gearbox to break, that's on your team to decide. Usually gearbox failures are a lot less likely than motor failures.
And generally you want to consider your drive motors first, just because those are usually going to be the bigger ones. You can make a robot using just Vex motors, but your robot has to be very light in that case, and depending on the competition, that's not always possible. So drive motors are the best ones to consider first, and they need to be able to be easily replaced, because if you end up with your final robot, you realize that your ratio was not correct and you need to swap them out. Or if you feel like, oh, you know what, we accounted for more force than we actually need and we want it to go faster and we can allow for it, then you want them to be easily swapped out. And you don't want that to conflict with your other motors either, because remember, there's a limit to how many you can use and how many of the same type you can use. So especially if you're using something like Mecanum, where you already have your 4 motors that have identical gearboxes of the identical type, you want to be careful with that.
That's it. One thing is sometimes when you're choosing your gear ratio, you'll find that, say, a 64:1 is too slow, but a 32:1 is too fast. If you look up, for the Banebot motors anyway, on Vex Pro, they do sell Versa hubs and gears that fit with them. They're all metal. They're designed to fit on the Banebot shaft. They're made for that application. They make it very easy to adapt and put a big gear or a small gear, whatever. They have gears going from 10 inches wide to 1 inch wide. Like, you have infinite possibilities with that, so you can customize your gear ratios for the application you need. It's not just what the Banebots give you. You can use chain. They have physical gears with teeth on them as well. So if you guys are planning on using Banebots, which I'm sure you will be, I do suggest go look on the Vex Pro part of Vex's website, because there's a lot of very useful information. They have designs there that you can follow as well. They have slider systems, a whole bunch of things that we might not be able to explain right now, but it might be very applicable for your design. There's so many designs that we can't go over all of them, obviously, but it's a good place to start looking for parts.
So this one's very important, and I've touched on it a lot so far, but all components need to be easy to access both while building and in the final robot design. So for those of you who actually attended the robot design workshop, we said keep it simple and accessible in your design already. The same goes for when you're building it. It needs to be accessible. So maybe in your design it looks like, yeah, I have enough space to get in there, but then in practice, fitting your drill or fitting the Allen key that you need might not be possible. So you need to consider those things. If you do not need to access it because it's something that's remaining fixed and chances are won't be broken, you should be okay. But always think about Murphy's Law, that if the one thing that can go wrong will go wrong, and the one thing that you can't access is going to be the one that's going to break. All right?
That's it. And one thing I find when you're doing your maintenance, something that's pretty easy to check if your maintenance is going to be easy to do, is take somebody on your team who might not have, like, say you're in charge of building the drive system, and you and 2 other people are doing that. Get somebody who's doing something else on the robot and say, hey, I need to take off the wheel, how do I go about doing that? And just watch them. If they have trouble, if it takes them 25 minutes to take the wheel off, then during a competition you won't have that time. If it's not easy for somebody who doesn't know what they're doing to see where the links are, it's going to be very difficult to maintain.
And one thing that actually happened to me in a competition once was we had an arm that was really well aligned and everything, all the gears were perfect, and one of the gears was a metal gear because we needed that force on it, but it got bent. The shaft that it was on got bent during the competition, which meant that the arm was no longer working properly and we needed to change it during the competition. So it was very, very challenging to get that metal gear off of the shaft. It took 4 people in a tug of war round to get it off. Try to have spare parts that are already assembled when you know that the possibility of a break could make them non-removable. All right, so make sure your spare parts are not just there, but they're there and ready to go in case they break.
That's it. Obviously, not every school has the budget or the time to do that, but things like claws are usually pretty easy to replicate, so having secondary pieces is always good. Just quick swap out. The same thing for electrical panels. Like if you have a big panel with fuses and connections on them, having a second piece is always useful.
Yeah, and another thing too is your backup doesn't have to be the same quality as your original, especially if you don't have the budget to do that. So if you need to make it out of cardboard the second time around, then just do that. It's not a big deal. It's not your first option anyway, but having a not so great system is better than no system at all.
No, that's it. If that system can work for 2 or 3 rounds while other people fix the main system, that can make a huge difference in the final points.
All right, so the next one is electrical system has to be protected and easy to access. So everyone always forgets about electrical in build, but it's one of the most important things, because without electrical and without good electrical, your robot will not run. So you have to make sure first and foremost that the Cortex or Arduino, whichever one you're using, is accessible but protected from damage. So you have to place it somewhere that you can access to make adjustments if your programmer needs to do that, or to turn it on and off without a problem. If you can't access the switch, your robot's not going to run, or it's just never going to stop running, and that's not good either. You need to consider the potential damage from that location and include a guard if necessary. So if your robot has its Cortex right on the front of the robot, and you accidentally hit a wall and smash it and all the wires on it, that's not a good thing. Try to put it in a place that, yes, it's accessible, but it won't get damaged. So having it slightly inside the robot so that if you bang into anything, it won't get hurt is fine. Consider the fact that depending on which level it's at, you're gonna have different obstacles on the playing field that could interfere with it. So if there's something that's hovering on the playing field where your wheels can pass, but it's going over and it might hit your cortex, you wanna make sure that you're gonna steer clear of that. So either your driver has to pay attention, or, and again, accidents do happen if another robot hits you into it. So your driver has to be paying attention, but it also has to have a fail-safe protection system.
Yeah. And when you are considering placing your Cortex or your Arduino, sometimes you can't help but put it somewhere that's not necessarily accessible. So some things that I've done in the past is there is an on-off switch on the Cortex that you need to use to turn it off, or else you're going to drain your batteries. But sometimes it's so tight where it is that I don't necessarily recommend doing it. But you can have your 7-volt system, which would be your battery for your Cortex, on a switch. You can put the switch remote somewhere else on the robot, so your Cortex is very well protected, and say you can drop down a panel to access it, but actually going to hit that switch is not worth dropping the access panel. Having that remote switch somewhere, like the kill switch that's provided for the 12-volt circuit, makes it easy to turn on and off. Another thing to keep in mind with the Cortex is that it runs on wireless, is it wireless or Bluetooth?
Wireless.
Bluetooth is wireless.
Yeah, well it's
So wireless Wi-Fi band.
yeah, it's a Wi-Fi band, which means that usually when your Cortex is going to be placed inside a robot, especially if it's made of a lot of metal, if it's made of a lot of metal, there is a lot of interference. There is potentially 200 people in the same room as you, all with their phones.
Already on the way. Never mind, sorry. Is there a robotic? Yes. Perfect. So he was actually wanting to join you guys. Perfect. So that's all you there, sir.
Okay, so your robot is inside. Think of it like this: your robot frame is basically just like a giant cage. So all of those signals are bouncing around. You have a few hundred phones within a few hundred feet of your robot disturbing it. So one thing that I've seen a lot of schools do, and took me a long time to realize why they were doing it, is the little white USB stick that comes with your Cortex. That's what's sending and receiving your signals. So a cheap 3 or 4 or 5 foot USB extension can take that USB stick, which is transmitting your signals, and you can put it high up on the robot away from the Cortex. 9 times out of 10, that solves interference issues. Just that tiny little $10 extension can save the whole robot. So just, if you need to hide your Cortex, keep the power delivery and the signals in mind. You have workarounds.
And the other thing too, be careful with your wiring. Wires generally are very tough, but they can also be very easily damaged. So try not to let them get twisted or pulled. Wires that are connected to components that are moving generally have to have a little bit more leeway. When you are wiring, you do want to try to give a little bit of slack to the wire, because you're going to have to crimp it and cut it. And if something goes wrong, you want a little bit of extra room just so that you can cut it where it needs to be cut and not have to replace the whole wire, and you're still gonna have enough room to reconnect it. So one thing that's good to do is, with your wire, add a little bit of extra depending on how long it is, about 25%, and then just twist it, put a zip tie around it, and if it needs to get fixed in any way, cut the zip tie, readjust, rewire.
That's it. And wherever possible, you can use wiring looms. I suggest using wiring looms when you have multiple wires to protect them, but also if they happen to fall, it's a lot harder to snag the actual plastic loom since it's hard and round than a wire. When you're running your wires, I suggest picking up either, they make little notepads that have labels on them that are made to stick around wires. I suggest either picking that up or just even taking masking tape and attaching it to each of your power wires and just writing on each end, this is drive motor 1 or top left corner, whatever, arm motor, things like that. So that way, say you're the only person who did the electrical work on your robot, if you're sick that day, whoever else is at the competition can go, hey, okay, that's the wire for this motor and it needs to be modified. I know where it goes, I know what needs to be cut. Because you'll see wiring, you end up using a lot more wire than you think on a robot. We've used 60, 70 feet of wire on a robot before, and when it's all black and red, it's very hard to tell what the difference is. So labeling things, having them tucked away from moving parts, are all small things that will help you a lot in the long run. Having them accessible, things like that, because they might need to be changed.
Yeah. Another thing, if you don't necessarily have the space or you feel like having tabs coming off of your wires is going to get in the way, if you don't have that many things that need to be connected, because you do have a limit on motors, electrical tape does come in different colors. So one thing we did last year was each motor had its own color code. So we put the electrical tape around the motor itself, and then at each terminal of the wire, and if it's a really long wire in the middle, you just wrap one little round of electrical tape. It doesn't take up any space. And then somewhere either on the robot or in your kiosk, you want to keep a little card saying what color goes to which motor specifically. That way, if there is a problem, you could say, okay, well, this motor's not working. I'm going to track all the wires with this color electrical tape. And that'll save you a lot of problems later. So yeah, keep your wires protected, keep track of them. If you have a long stretch of wire that's going down something, maybe coil it around so that it doesn't get pulled or snagged onto anything and it's kept tight. Appropriate wire gauge is very important, but it's not necessarily, something that you're going to need to look into and do a lot of research for. Generally, just looking at a table is fine. You're probably going to end up using 18 to 22 for VEX and 12 to 14 for the bigger stuff.
Okay, so this is just basically this whole entire chart here is just to tell you if you go smaller than 14 for your 12 volt power, you're gonna have a problem. So no smaller than 14, and really anything bigger than 10, there's no point. So 12, 14 is perfect for these types of robots.
Wire management prevents accidental disconnect and impact, so just make sure that cable management, again, it's kind of repetitive from the second to last slide, but connecting wires, it can be done in many different ways. The two main ones that you're probably going to end up seeing are soldering and crimping. Soldering is for more permanent connections. Crimps are generally when you need to connect something to a terminal, or if you just need to get something done quickly on the spot at a competition. Crimps are going to be your best friend there. Make sure you can crimp every wire gauge that you need because it's a very different ballgame between 22 and a 12. Connections to terminals usually are going to be crimp connects. Make sure that they're screwed tightly, especially with the fork connectors. So the fork ones are the ones that are not complete. You have the full round ones that the bolt goes into. If those are a little bit loose, the metal-to-metal connection should be maintained. But if it's a fork, it could easily slip out. So make sure it does not slip out. Tighten it properly, but don't tighten it so much that your crimp breaks. Okay? Two cable wires also, if you need to connect them together, so especially with VEX, you can do that with a zip tie by just splitting the wires a little bit. So if their terminal has two wires going into it, slip a zip tie between them, tighten it, but don't tighten it so much that it starts to bend it or else it will snap. So just enough that they won't disconnect from each other, and then you can wrap it with electrical tape just to make sure that they stay safe. Also make sure that the terminals leading to the cortex are secure and they can't be pulled out accidentally. So one thing that's usually good to do is to have all of the wires leading into the cortex, plug them in first, and then assemble them all together and bolt them down somewhere so that that point of connection going to the terminal is not going to be interfered with if they get pulled somewhere else.
Okay, so again, if you want to do your maintenance, making removable links is essential. You need to be able to swap your parts without having to do 2 hours of work to get to them. Make sure you have spare parts ready to go. Don't take apart the whole robot to fix one thing. Make sure removing said part is possible without having to have an engineering degree. And the wires should have removable sections as well. Don't just think about the actual physical parts of the robot, but the wiring as well.
Yeah, so make sure if you need a motor to be connected, have it in several segments if needed so that you can just swap out the individual wire, especially if you don't have enough wire to do that 25% loops that you have extra. Make sure, again, maintenance has to be minimal. So maintenance is inevitable, but keep it to a low. Make something that is resilient that won't necessarily break as often. The best way to do that is between each round, do a check on your robot. If things are well maintained, they're less likely to break. So have someone do a bolt check, motor check, wire test, and if you have time, test the operation of the robot. So go with your controller, test every single aspect of what needs to get done. Keep in mind from the last workshop on design that the simple designs are easier to maintain, and the same goes for simple and efficient construction. So if it's easily built, then it's easily maintained because you can check it a lot faster.
Okay, so now I'm just going to quickly go over basic tool safety. So you have to always consider, is your tool in good shape? If you pick up your tool and you go, hey, this looks kind of funny, go find a supervisor, make sure it's in the proper shape. Is it the right size for the job? So you have multiple sizes of screwdrivers, they're not always the right size for the screw that you're using. Is it clean, maintained, etc.? If it's not clean and it seems funny, again, ask a supervisor. Only use tools designed for their use, so don't use a flathead and a hammer to try and chip something. Use a chisel, like, come on, we're not animals. So pointy tools such as screwdrivers, punches, chisels, etc. should always be carried point down towards the ground, not in pockets and passed by the handle. Avoid open-soled shoes and socks and Crocs and things like that, as well as loose clothes when working, because if you drop something, it's going to land on your feet. Keep materials off the floor. You don't want to be tripping while you're carrying your robot. Wear eye, hearing, respiratory, and hand protection wherever necessary, using striking tools, power tools, cutting tools, etc. And one thing that's very often overlooked is the other people in the room. If you need to have hearing protection in order to do the job you're doing, and there's 6 other people in the room, they probably need it too. So keep them in mind, please.
Especially if you have like a small room, have a designated area for certain jobs. So if you're doing power tools and you need glasses, there should be a range where you can even tape it on the floor and say anyone walking past this point, doesn't matter if you're working on it or not, you have to be wearing glasses, you have to be wearing certain things in order to enter that zone if a power tool is being used. Otherwise it could be dangerous for them as well.
Okay, so there's like basically 5 categories of tools that we're going to be working with. So you're going to have your cutting and metalworking tools, so your chop saw or your bandsaw. An alternative, which is cheaper for some schools that might not have the space or the budget for these tools, is a metal hack saw and just a straight line. 90% of the time the cut is as good. You have press drills, and again, a cheaper alternative, electric drills, even hand drills if you're working with wood, depending on the situation. A good drill bit set, utility knife and scissors, and a metal file and sandpaper. That's pretty much everything you're going to need to be able to cut and put together a metal or wood robot. You have your measuring tools, so measuring tape, adjustable square, and bubble level to make sure things are cut straight. And then assembly tools, so your impact driver or a hand screwdriver, pliers, wrenches, sockets, a hammer, and a mallet. In a lot of cases, a mallet will be better because it won't leave a mark. Metal hammers leave marks on metal.
Some hammers come with a little protective plastic thing that kind of looks like the stopper on a walker, but you can just put it over the head of the hammer and that'll do the same job.
Yeah, because remember, you will be judged a little bit on how pretty your robot looks, so if you can avoid making it look ugly, go ahead. And then you'll need some Allen keys and a screwdriver set to assemble your robot. After that, you have your clamping tools, so vice grips and a bench vise. Bench vise is going to get you by 90% of the times for cutting, prying, putting things together. A C-clamp is useful if you have a large object on a table, if it's too large to fit in a bench vise. And then a corner clamp is extremely useful when you're putting together your frame if it's square, because it's very hard to hold 2 pieces of metal together while you're screwing in another bracket, especially if you're alone. You have your wiring tools, which 9 times out of 10 it's going to be a soldering iron or wire crimps, depending on your level of comfort. Soldered connections are stronger, they're a little bit harder to do, take a little bit more time. I've seen very strong crimp connections, so don't be afraid to use wire crimps, they're not worse. And then helping hands, which is just some little pinchers that will hold your wires together while you're soldering them. Trust me, it makes it so much easier to solder, and it's not expensive. I do recommend picking one up.
One thing, if you're using wire crimps, just make sure that when you're done your crimp, give it a good pull, not just a little like, okay, I think it's in place, pull it. If it comes apart, it's not strong enough, do it again.
Don't try and hang off the ceiling with it,
Yeah.
but a little tug.
Any questions?
Yes, sir.
You said the extension for the USB.
Yes.
Where would you get that?
Amazon, Addison, any electronics store. It's a USB A to A extension, like a male end on one side and a female on the other. And you should have 2 in the robotics room. We bought 2 last year.
You're welcome. Any other questions? If ever you guys come up with
you try and like, you build up towards defeating whatever you have to defeat or overcoming whatever obstacle you have to overcome, and then the resolution is like you've achieved the thing and you've saved the princess or you've whatever, you know. It depends on what your story is, and you can vary that by adding, you know, the same that same 1, 2, 3 formula. You can kind of like repeat it in different ways, like in smaller ways with other conflicts that happen as the story progresses, essentially. Okay, so that's a lot of what needs to be covered in, you know, making, you know, scoring points and like why the video exists. So has anyone, so we said a lot of people have made videos before, so does anyone like have a lot of experience with editing software, or like what kind of thing? Yes?
I had 2 video classes where we used Premiere.
Premiere, okay, so who's familiar with Premiere? Okay, most people, okay, great, sure.
I know Windows Movie Maker.
That works too. I mean, like, you don't have to use a fancy tool, right? These tools are really expensive. You can get like student discounts, but they're not that heavy. It's not, you use the tools that you have available to you, but if you guys want a good little maybe cheat or hack that's completely legal, and I'm not gonna, if you have other ways of getting Premiere,
we can do it Persian style.
I won't say it. I'm not, listen, I don't know anything about that, okay? But a perfectly
You should
legal,
acquire Premiere.
if you can acquire Premiere, sure. But if you want a perfectly legal way of doing it, then you can save your editing for like a week-long period. Like, I think it's a week or maybe 14 days. If you think you can edit your entire video in 14 days, which is very doable if you put your mind to it and you have some time to do it, Adobe offers a trial of their software. So what you can do is prepare everything up until that point, and then get your editing done in those 14 days during that trial, export the video, and then you're done.
You can always like change your email so you get unlimited trials.
That also works. That also works. Yeah, totally. Yeah,
Also, inform yourselves. Sometimes your school has the program for free.
that's very true as well.
At
If
their-
your school has a video editing lab, it's probably worth finding out if.
Finding out what, Massimo?
It's worth finding out if you have access to that video lab or not. Because I know that at least this school does. You can like walk into a video lab and just sit down at a computer and log in and start editing. For the Vanier people, I don't know about the other schools here. It's possible that you guys have video labs. Not for sure. So there's a couple other things that you want to keep in mind when you're organizing your video. So basically, you can have a team that you'll want to divvy up your roles, right? So a lot of robotics teams kind of just don't have any set structure to them. Some do, some don't. In this instance, it's probably really advisable to have like a set video team, and you say like who does what. So like if you have like a video captain or like a director or whatever, he'll like end up writing all of the story and doing the storyboards, and we'll talk about what that is in a second. And just overall giving guidance to the team. And then it's useful to have maybe like a director of photography that'll be someone who will do a lot of the filming, and someone responsible for sound, and then your actors. So that makes it so that you can have like a 3-man team that does all of your filming, and you'll be relatively efficient. I don't recommend doing 1-man like run and gun. It's really tough, but one person? Sorry? What?
One person.
If you only have one person available to you to do the entire video production, it's gonna suck, but really you'll benefit a lot from pre-production. So like planning is key here. Make sure that you write a storyboard, and this really applies for any size team, but especially if you're one man, or woman. So you'll want to make sure that you have every shot laid out. You can make a storyboard, which is basically little comic strips, essentially, where you draw like rough approximations of what you're going to be having in each shot, just so you have like a sequence of events in your mind and the way your story is going to progress. You know, like, okay, I need to set up this and it needs to look this way. Okay, I'm going to set up this and it needs to look that way. And then you pull in your actors as you need them, and give them maybe a bit of a chance to look at the lines that they might be saying. I really don't recommend that you have them like improvise their lines as they go, unless they're exceptional actors and have been, you know, have a lot of practice doing that, because then you get, you know, what I just showed you. But regardless, you can still win. Like, that video surprisingly won first place, right? I mean, it just really depends on what's submitted that year.
Awkward funny is still pretty good.
Yeah, exactly. Awkward and funny is a niche that you can go after, right? And the judges know this. You're not going to have like exceptional. They're not going to be moved by your film, you know. Like, for the most part, they're just going to see like, oh, okay, you have the basics down here. So yeah, storyboard, script. So if you've never seen script writing before, it's really just like you'll have your character name at the top, and then a block of what they say, and then every time a new character speaks, you put the character name and then their block of text. And then if you want to do actions, you do like in square brackets, you just do like whatever their action is, stuff like that. Keep it simple. It doesn't have to be like a really formal script. There's a lot of videos on that online for writing formal scripts, but whatever shorthand works for you is perfectly fine. As for like how you should construct your story, a lot of that depends on what your theme is. So I don't know if any schools have their themes picked yet or not. Can I just hear some? If anyone's comfortable sharing their theme, I'm guessing no. Yes?
Mine is CRC.
Yours is CRC. Okay, great. So if your theme is CRC, you can say like, you can have a story something like, I don't know, you have 2 weeks to complete the plan for the game, and oh no, you guys waited to the last minute to plan your game. So how exactly are you going to get over that goal? Well, you can get fancy, or you can get like mythical with it. You can say like, oh, we invented a time machine instead of, you know, instead of using that time to plan our, instead of using that time to plan the game, we invented a time machine so we can go back and have more time, or something like that, right? It could be dumb. It could be like, it doesn't have to make a lot of sense. As long as there's like kind of like some continuity there, it's totally okay. It has to be cohesive. I'm assuming a lot of you have had to write a story before, like in school, you know, like stuff that you've learned in school is perfectly sufficient for writing a story here. Just apply those same concepts to writing a script. Then you should have, so once you actually get into the filming process, it's good to make sure that you're organized in the way that you store your footage, in the way that you kind of manage the people that are going to be coming in and out of your set, because as you might imagine, like robotics teams are big, and you'll just have to grab whoever you can to act, because I know a lot of teams, like, they don't have a lot of people, or they don't have a lot of people that are willing to participate in the video, so you really have to work with what you get a lot of the time. The golden rule there is just to keep continuity between actors. Like, don't swap out your actor like midway through your video. It's going to be really confusing. Or if you know that you don't have that luxury, like, I know that, oh, this specific person, or like the specific people that I'll have available to me during my shooting schedule is like these people, and it's going to be rotating constantly, then you'll have to write your story around that limitation, right? So like, if you can't acquire consistency, write inconsistencies into your story so that it helps make up for your weaknesses there. A good way of making sure that production goes smoothly is making sure that every day is accounted for and sectioned off. So every time you shoot a scene, like, ingest that footage right away, bring it to a computer, mark it as like this day, this time, like these are the scenes. Like, make sure you have a record of everything that you do, because it makes your life way easier when you need to go back and like reference a specific thing that you did. You'll like be looking at like, oh, what did I do on the first day of shooting, and it's day 10 of shooting. Oh man, do we have to reshoot this part? Keep like keep a lot of notes is helpful on set. If you have that luxury of being more than one person, then definitely, even if you're only one person, it's helpful to try and keep like a list of notes, like shot this on this day, need to do this, or like need to do a pickup scene, like basically like if you missed a certain part and you need to reshoot it, or you look at it and it's like, oh, it's no good, then make sure you account for that in your production schedule. So like have a couple days at the end of your shoot to like do anything that you might have missed, or anything that you think could be improved. So make sure you review your footage as you go. It's the worst when you like get to the end of production and then you say, oh no, the audio is scrapped for this entire day of shooting, and now what do I do? I have to just either deal with bad audio or just reshoot it or bite the bullet. A lot of the time it's probably worth it to just get it reshot, because it'll be faster and like of a higher quality the second time you do it, if you can afford to allocate that time. And then after that, you'll probably end up moving into post-production. I have a couple clips that I'll probably, I'll have to find a way to show it to you guys, because it's probably good. And if no one's used Premiere before, like a couple of you said you've had some experience with Premiere, right? How many
Yes.
people again? Okay, so not too many. Okay, so it's probably helpful and illustrative to at least see how some editing software works. Do you all have at least some experience with editing software? No way. Okay.
Some, but maybe not correct.
Okay, so we'll have to like maybe get a little bit more intimate, and I'll show my laptop to you guys, and we'll get some editing done. I'm happy to show you guys. So yeah, that is not. I can't think if I'm missing anything else. Yeah, because that would be basically the end, but I don't know if I've covered everything that everybody needs. Does anyone have any questions? Yeah.
I forgot. No, I remember
Helpful.
now. How long do you think like the filming process should take?
Okay, so ideally you want to get your entire filming process done in maybe a week to 2 weeks. But it depends the complexity of your shoot, right? If you're going for like this wide breadth story where you're going to be covering like a lot of topics, which I mean, maybe I don't highly recommend, just because the more complexity you add to a video, the harder it is to kind of manage. Then yeah, but yeah, the more complex your video is, obviously the longer your shooting schedule will be. But generally like 1 to 2 weeks is enough to like get everything you need for a 5-minute video. As far as script writing goes, think of it like per page is about 1 minute of filming. So like if you have a page on a script, like all of that will add up to about a minute of footage, more or less. So if you have a 5-page script, then,
How long did the Tron video that you so gloriously made take to film?
Oh man, honestly, I think it was really done in about 4 days, 4 or 5 days, if I remember correctly. Roughly. It was post-production that was really heavy. So you guys saw in that video there was like a lot of like 3D like renders and visual effects and all kinds of stuff. So post-production was really heavy, and it's important to account for that. If you want to have like a lot of visual effects, if you have someone on your team that is like skilled at that, then they're going to need time to do that, because good visual effects take time.
And you had the playing field there.
Yeah.
How necessary is it to have the playing field to explain the game?
Like rendered in 3D?
Yeah.
Not 100% necessary. You can do like simple line drawings, like
Okay.
if you have like even a little bit of experience with After Effects, you can do like a really simple line drawing and just like animate some stuff on it. It's just useful for illustrative purposes, but if you think that you can explain really well in words, then that's perfectly sufficient.
You can get creative. There's some schools that have done stop motion, like Lego versions.
Yeah, I remember
That
that.
totally works. You have to work with what you
I
have,
think
right?
Blood did that.
Totally. Yeah, that's a great
Video.
idea. It's a really good idea. Yeah, definitely.
Like stop motion version of their robot.
Of the playing field.
Playing
Playing
field.
field. Yeah, so instead of doing like a 3D render, like, you know, you can use any filmmaking tactics that are available to you. Like, there's so many, and this is where you guys get to do a bit of independent research. Like, you can see, like, how did they do this back in the day? You know, like, how did they do Star Wars in the 80s with, like, all those crazy effects? But a lot of it was practical, and you can get a lot done with just practical effects. Just like that stop motion solution. It's a really clever one. I would have never thought of that, right? Yeah. Here's another one.
What would you say is the biggest mistake that people make generally when making these videos?
Oh man.
Or what's the one mistake that people fall into easily?
Oh, man, it's a good question because
You
there's
can
so
name
many.
multiple.
There's so many. There's so many. Basically, underjudging how much work it actually ends up being a lot of the time. If you want a quality product, I said this about visual effects, but it's really true about video in general. It's like good video takes time, and the less time you use, the more compromises you're gonna have to make. So if you try and rush your production schedule, you're gonna be like rushing your actors, and they're not gonna know their lines, or they're gonna just be saying stuff, or they're just gonna be saying anything, you know? So like, it's not gonna be as quality, and you're gonna miss out on stuff. So like a good example that I ran into is that when I made, not the video we just showed you, but the year after, I completely omitted part of the rules that I needed to include, like describing some of the rules. And I had to do it like basically the day of submission. I had like someone do voiceover. I recorded their audio, and then I made like a really simple line drawing, like I said in After Effects, where it would just like, it showed like, in that case it was like a triangle that you had to like put pool noodles into, and wherever you put your pool noodles, it was like however many points you got, basically, depending on the shape they took. So that's what I did. I made it really simple. I tried to tie it into the story that we had of that year, which was like Game of Thrones. I guess I could just show you, honestly. It's really bad. But it's, you know,
Not bad.
it's pretty bad.
Yeah, it is.
But like, whatever, it worked.
What's the latest video?
No, yeah, I won't. Don't
Free
worry.
video that-
Can you bring up the 2010
No.
or is it 2008 one?
No, definitely not. So here.
Can you turn off the lights?
It has to be made of this rare metal called Vexium. And it has to be built just where the dragons live in.
So this is like
That's not all.
really bad.
Only by blocking the most dragon caves with the largest amount of stone pillars can we score the most points. The way in which we block the caves is also important.
It's like
If
really
we are
bad.
able to arrange our pillars in such a way that they form a triangle after they are inserted to block the cave, we will receive a favor from the Common Royalty Committee, or as they go by, the CRC, in the form of a
Wow.
points multiplication. We will also have assistance.
So like this is
from
what I was
other
talking about.
CRC
You can have just like a line drawing like
Yes,
this.
2 other clans
It's
are
totally
also
acceptable.
for the
Just
favor.
doesn't look as nice, but you know, when you have like, I don't know, like 8 hours to like make it, it's totally okay. You know, it's perfect.
Some points is better than no points.
Exactly. It carries over from everything you do in this competition. Some points is definitely always better than no points. And in that case, if we omitted that, just that small section, we probably would have not gotten any points at all, right? I mean, in that instance, that video ended up taking 3rd place, which is like not bad for like how crappy that was, you know. So yeah. Nice. Anything else? Yeah.
Let's just say like the video team is like working arduously, you know?
Sure.
Very hard.
Yeah.
And the deadline comes and they submit it a couple minutes after. Would it still be accepted?
Nah.
What was the question?
Yeah,
Is
it's,
it accepted if it's submitted a few minutes after midnight?
I mean,
It's a
it'll be
hard
considered a
deadline.
late submission.
I'm not gonna answer the question.
Yeah, if it's considered a late submission, then like
Why would
we're
you
liable
want
to dock you many points. Basically.
Why would you want to do that?
Yeah,
No,
don't.
I'm just asking.
So
like,
this is where
like-
the concept of scheduling comes into
Yeah.
play really well.
Like if everything like goes wrong, that can go wrong.
Yeah.
Like already
well,
like.
The idea also carries over from the robot construction
Yeah.
workshop. If anything can go wrong, it probably will go wrong.
Yeah.
So try and account for that. So like if you're worried about that, then I would leave you like like start your video like weeks before, right? Like you already know the rules of the competition, right?
Yeah.
I'm sure you all know the rules of the competition. I hope. Okay, that means you can start writing like now, and I suggest you start writing now because that gives you a lot of time in case things go wrong. So like, even if it's just thinking about like the concepts that you're going to be doing, and if you don't have a theme picked yet, then just try and think of like what kind of obstacle can I make out of the competition in question this year. You know, it could be like there's an evil robot overlord that is controlling where the beanbags go, and we have to fight back and take control of the beanbag machine or something.
That's actually pretty good.
It's not a bad one, right? And you guys are free to use it. Just make sure that yes.
How much time should I allocate to upload? That should take 30 seconds.
Right? Oh yeah, when you have a very small video, yeah, no, definitely. So a lot of the time, your video file is going to be in orders of gigabytes, probably like 2 or 3, because you want to leave your video as uncompressed as possible. Let YouTube do the compression for you, so that you lose quality through them and not on your own. But yeah, anyways, your video will be like gigabytes, so you want to probably upload like a day or 2 in advance at minimum. Just to be safe, right? Not because it's going to take that long, just because you'll upload it and then inevitably you'll notice like, oh no, our captions are wrong here. What do we do? Well, now you're going to have to go fix them. So you're going to have to take down the video, fix the captions, upload the new video. So just to account for mistakes that end up happening for sure, you'll want to give yourself like a day or 2. Yeah.
Also, don't submit the link to the YouTube video until the YouTube video is completely uploaded.
Yeah, so YouTube also has like a processing period in which they like have to like, generate all the different versions, the different like sizes of your video. So it'll be 360p, 480p, 720p, and 1080p. Like, and some of that means that it won't show up on YouTube until it's done that sometimes. So just make sure that you can see the video on a public YouTube account before you submit the link. It's like pretty important because it'll be considered late if not. Yeah.
If I upload my video as private a week in advance because I'm so early and then submit a private link to you, and then it has to be public as according to the rules, what do I do?
Well, just don't do that.
That's
a pretty simple solution. Yeah, make sure your videos are public. A lot of this stuff is in the rules. So like, there's like probably a step 0 that I forgot to mention. Step 0 should be read the rules. Like, it's super important. Like, please, yes. Yeah.
So you are allowed to submit a private link, but the video has to be made public by the first day of the competition.
Okay. Yeah, there you go. That's exactly right. Yeah.
Okay. Does the rules explain how to do any of this stuff?
How to do any of this? How to do anything?
I've never put anything on YouTube, so I don't know how to do it.
Oh, okay, yeah. It doesn't, but we can maybe.
Yeah, you can.
Do I close the lights again?
If you want, we could add a link on a how to
upload to YouTube.
Yeah, there's for sure. Internet is always your #1 source for information.
Totally.
I'm not even. I have 0 doubt that if we type how to make video private public on Google, the first link would be right. So we can add that to the presentation and we'll make the presentation available online.
Sure, but it's honestly like super easy. Like, you have a Google account, I'm assuming, like a Gmail account.
I don't.
I mean, you have you don't have a Gmail account?
I have my email, but I don't use it very often.
Okay, so essentially to upload to YouTube, you just need a Google Gmail account, and if you have a Google Gmail account or like just a Google account, it'll allow you to upload to YouTube with that account. And then like basically, if you're logged into YouTube, you'll have like this similar view over here, and you'll see like there's a plus button with this camera, and then you could just click upload video, and then
just continue clicking the get started and continue. And
I don't know what that is. We can just.
That's good. Are you logged in?
Oh yeah. Okay. Oh, I see.
You get started.
Okay, so if your channel's not set up, you'll have to go through all this stuff. Can I just?
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah. So I'll just use this name for this channel.
You're a YouTuber now.
You are now a YouTuber. You can set all the rest of that up later. So it should let you just click upload a video. and then it'll bring you to. It's very illustrative. Like as you go through the process, like there's a lot of dialogues that I'm sorry I'm skipping through them, but like you'll definitely see them like when you're uploading yourself. Like there's dialogues that come up that show you like what to do, and they give you like, a lot of steps. But it's really as simple as that. Like once you click that upload video and your account is set up properly, you just like select a file and you can just I mean I don't have a video on this, you know, on this account on this computer, but like you just click select file and then you pick your file and then it'll just upload, and then you can fill in the like the details for the video as it's uploading. So like you give it a title and a description, which are criteria that your video needs to have.
We will include a how-to video in this slideshow.
Totally, yeah.
And worst case scenario, you can Google how do I do this, and YouTube, since it's part of Google, there's a very large amount of information out there on how to do things.
Totally, yeah, definitely.
I'm gonna open the lights now,
Yeah.
so watch your eyes.
Yeah. Sorry about the.
So, something like you know, like 3D effects and all is cool when you have like a modern thing.
Yeah.
But let's say our theme is the Stone Age.
Yeah.
Because we're all stoners.
Right. Sure.
And,
okay. Nice.
Hypothetically.
Sure.
So would like that, if we do that with like very like again Stone Age material, is that worth the same as someone who does the After Effect and the visual?
Totally. Yeah. If you have like anything that's illustrative enough that shows like the playing field, or like so you don't actually have to show like a 3D model of the playing field. Like I said, like a line drawing is perfectly sufficient. Or like if you have like let's say you're in the Stone Age, okay, and you have like cavemen and they're huddled around the dirt and they have like a stick and like draw in the dirt and they say like, you know, this is the Oonga Boonga and it does this, you know, and like you draw roughly what it looks like. That's perfectly okay, as long as you're describing like what is actually happening in the game and it's like clear to a viewer like the rough rules of the game. Then it's perfectly fine. You don't have to be super fancy. Just a lot of schools ended up being fancy because like other schools do fancy 3D effects, and then you know like they did it,
just
so I
like
want to do
it
it.
really depends on the theme. You know?
It totally depends on the theme.
For
Yes.
us, like Stone Age or I don't know, maybe Bronze Age, those themes would not work
Sometimes
out.
cheesy effects are appreciated by the judges.
Yeah,
like if it's part of the joke.
Yeah, then it works, you know.
Like, it doesn't need to be Hollywood level.
Exactly. Like I said, illustrative is better than like fancy. Like as long as the idea is clear, then it's perfectly okay. Yeah, actually, so it turns out we're pretty much right at the end. Is there any other questions? We can probably take a couple
Will
more.
there be a tutorial of any sort on how to do 3D animation?
We can look into that.
We can look into that.
Yeah, sure, no problem. I also have like a playlist that I can probably make sure is distributed that has like a ton of resources on just like basics of video, like how to make videos, like this is what, like, and it gets really technical, so you can like watch the whole thing and like learn a lot about writing stories and using software and all that sort of stuff. I don't know if I can find it really
Video
quickly.
101 without paying for class.
Yeah, it's literally like an online like I basically compiled a
It's a playlist.
bunch of online. Yeah, it's a playlist. It's a YouTube playlist, and I just make it public. And I can give it to you guys.
We'll probably share it and.
We'll see after.
You guys want to come closer instead of like sitting all the way in the back?
I think,
I'll come closer.
I feel
There
like,
you go.
I don't know, it's what my teachers used to always tell me when I was going to see Jeff to stay closer.
Congratulations, you're now old.
Hey, I'm old. Not really though. Alright, so for the few people in this room that don't know me, my name's Alex. I've been involved with CRC for going on 4 years. I was a participant for 3 years before that. And now I'm in university studying software engineering, so I'm going to give you guys the workshop about websites. So we're going to start things off by just giving a bit of an overview of the rules. For those of you who are competitors, have you guys read the rules about websites yet? Okay, cool. So I'll go for it then. So basically, before you even start, as Massimo said before during the workshop on videos, it's always important to read the rules. Because if you read the rules, you know what's being expected of you, and you'll save yourself a lot of time in the last week when you read the rules again and be like, oh, we forgot to do this. Like for example, when we did the video and it got to the end and we were editing our video the week before, we had to submit it, and we realized, oh, we didn't include anything about the robot. Oh, captain, my captain. So always read the rules before you start, because you'll save a lot of people from yelling at you. I'm kidding, I love you, Massimo. So yeah, so what is the purpose of the website? What's the goal? And of course, how do you score points with the website? So the website itself, the rules are, the scoring is broken into 2 sections about aesthetics, so how it looks, how the user experiences, and the second part is more technical. Aesthetics, it's a mix of, like the most important thing is that the overall design, including the choice and combination of colors, fonts, layout, are appealing and conducive to a pleasant user experience, which means if I go to your website and it's like black and bright red and bright green and it's really like hurtful to my eyes, likely you're not going to get that many points in there. There's a lot of really great tools online that you can use to just search. If you just search like color palettes, it'll give you like a set of related colors or colors that work well together. And right there, that's like a really great start to just pick a color palette that works for your website. It'll really help you give a good base to get started. The first secondary one is the structure, page structure, menu design. Will allow the user to find information easily. We'll get to that in a little bit. Towards the end, in the tips and tricks, there's a really good rule of thumb to use when you're doing, when you're designing your structure, the structure of your website and the structure of your pages. And the last 3 are secondary, but kind of also important if you actually want to use the skills that you're learning when you're doing the website in the future. So the website's constructed using a CSS3 or better and validated against HTML5 standards. This basically just means that you're not using technologies from like 2008. You know, you're using recent stuff so that's relevant, and again, so that you're building skills that actually are going to be useful for you in the future if you want to do something related to that. And finally, presence of user social interaction. Basically it's not just boring text, maybe you have a little bit of fun in there, maybe some social links. I know back in our days we used to put games in there, we did a lot of animations. Again, that's like a very very low on the priority list, so if you're focusing on this at the beginning, probably not a good idea. Focus on getting the rest done, and then towards the end, if you can, add some social user interaction to make it a bit more fun to use. In terms of technicalities, obviously the website has to be publicly accessible, so if we can't see your website, you're not going to score very well. There's no bugs, like links that are broken, images that are missing, or things that'll cause your website to explode. So if we're looking around your website and we click a link and it doesn't go anywhere, and you get a nice 404 page, which means that that page doesn't exist, you'll probably lose a few marks. And also, for me especially, when I introduced this rule a little while ago, the website needs to be functional in major web browsers, which means Google Chrome, Firefox, Microsoft Edge, and Safari. Why? Because a lot of internet technologies, they don't work well in different browsers for different reasons, which I won't get into, but just make sure that you test it in all the different browsers, because you don't know what we're going to use to actually test your website, so it's better for you if you test it beforehand in the major browsers. Secondary objective, of course, the site's code is well-formed and validated, especially if you're primarily writing the code of the website yourself, which you should hopefully be doing a little bit. Make sure that it's readable. Like when we inspect the code, we want to be able to read your code and make sure that it's like the flow is easy to understand.
A lot of us, like Massimo and I, we're working in our respective fields for almost 2 years now, and readable code is really important. And finally, the site demonstrates a grasp of underlying web technologies. Basically, this, again, it's the least important because we want to make sure that the fundamentals are hit before you get to this stage. We want to reward sites that are built by hand and built from scratch over sites that are built from WordPress now and content management systems. Now what this means is that if you choose to use WordPress, you're not going to get penalized. But if your website does all the criteria and there's another website that does all the criteria, but they did a lot more coding than you, the website that did a lot more coding than you is probably going to win because they put more effort into it than just using a content management system. Yes, Massimo.
Can you describe what WordPress and or a content management system is for some people who don't know?
I can show you. How's that?
Oh, that's great.
That's too much.
Actually, no.
Yep.
I think it's that admin now. I think. Well,
No.
that works too.
I mean, both work. Both trigger words work.
You want to close the screen?
Why is that? Why?
I mean, no one can read the.
No, just look at him. He's going in incognito, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I have to remember my password though.
This is how the remainder of the workshop will be used.
Just 1, 2, 3,
Somebody
6.
try mine? I think I remember
Try
mine.
password.
It's definitely not a password. I just remember how complicated I made my password.
And then somebody else has a password.
That's not
that's
good.
also-
All right.
Let's go on a word.
You want me to log in?
No, it's okay.
There you go.
Wow.
All right, so this is kind of what your boilerplate WordPress backend looks like. I'm using WordPress as an example because it's the most common one out there, especially for beginners that are just starting out with this. Yes?
What's WordPress?
WordPress is a content management system. And what exactly it is what I'm about to show you.
Oh, okay.
I thought it was the lifeline for PHP.
Sorry?
I thought it was PHP's lifeline.
Nope.
No, no. Don't get Massimo started on that. Okay, so before you go check any more questions, I'm just going to show you a bit about what it is, and then if you still have questions
Sure, yeah,
after,
definitely.
we can do that.
So it basically builds the website for you?
It manages the content. So WordPress, the two major components of WordPress are your plugins and your theme. So plugins are kind of what make or add a bit more interactivity to your website. So if you have things like I don't know, there's security plugins, of course. There's security plugins being plugins that protect your site from malicious hackers. We had a lot of fun with that over the summer. There's plugins that add make embedding YouTube videos in your website easy. There's a lot of different plugins out there. You can actually go and browse the catalog of all the ones that are all available right here. And then there's theme. Theme as a school that's starting out with WordPress for the first time, you're probably going to be more focused on this. There's a lot of free themes out there, and basically what it is just the look and feel of what the user is going to see when they go to their website. So if you choose a theme that's super basic, like the default one, let me show you. I don't want to get too into this, but then I'll just be the WordPress tutorial. It's not kind of the point. But so there's different themes, and if we go and see. So the theme is what makes the front, what you see as a user the way it is. So if you, some themes will have posts involved and whatnot. Like I said, I don't want to get too into what WordPress is. If you have questions about that, I can show you after, no problem. But basically, the theme is kind of what styles what the user sees, and then WordPress itself is how you manage the content. So you don't actually have to code anything if you choose this route for the most part. You just pick a theme and yeah, I like the way that this one looks, or you can switch and be like, oh, well, you know what? I kind of like this column here with this image and this text there. I want to choose that theme instead. So that's what a theme is. It's really just the way that it just really defines on how the user sees the content.
So it's like a template?
Yeah, exactly. It's a template. so the content itself, that's where WordPress itself comes in. So you have, let's say, so you have the sample page, for example. WordPress is a content management system because you can go in and manage your content. So you can go in and find a page that you wrote previously, and you can just go ahead and just, I don't know, because it's cool, and then delete the rest. I don't know. So you can, it's basically just a really simple way of managing the content on your website without having to write any code. So if you're new to website development and don't have the time to maybe learn how to code, this is a great alternative, and you'll still get most of your points. Like I said, the only trade-off is that you risk going a little bit below somebody who does everything well and codes their website. But again, from what I remember, it's not worth that much in your goals, but it is a tertiary point. But yeah. So that's kind of what a content management system. Thank you. Did I answer your question last one?
Yes. I didn't like it.
There's also a lot better content management systems out there, like some for Laravel, for example, but they're still in beta and they're pretty garbage.
No was pretty good though. Yeah. But yeah, it's okay. We'll get it.
All right. So getting back to the actual presentation, so that's kind of how you score points. It's you get the primary goals done first, hit the secondary goals, and then if you have time, try and work on the tertiary ones. For WordPress, if you can show us somehow that you coded a bit of a plugin maybe that, I don't know, put an animation on a Facebook button, that's cool. That works. Or made some modifications to the theme.
Made your own custom.
Or made your own custom theme. That's a lot of work for WordPress. But if you did that, I would give you a lot of points if I was judging. But I digress. There's also the question of content versus design. So when you're building your website, you need to have a good balance of content and a good balance of content to design. For example, if you have a lot of text and a lot of you write this whole novel about how your team built the robot, but it's a really boring, it looks like you copy pasted it from Word into a web page. You have too much content and not enough design. So you have to find that balance. On the other end, if you have a nice design, it's really nice and it's really flowy, but your entire web page has 4 words on it, well, you have a really nice design but no content. So you really have to find that nice balance to create a good website.
And also you're evaluated on both separately.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so where to start? First and foremost, you got to I'd suggest doing a wireframe. And what a wireframe is, it's exactly what it sounds like. You draw a nice little rectangle on a whiteboard or a piece of paper, and you say, okay, my title is going to go here. So it's the name of your website. You're going to have menu options here. You're going to have a nice picture of Massimo here.
Wow.
There you go.
Coincidence.
There you go.
Picasso, is that you?
And then, okay, so this is you have a menu bar here. This is a nice big image, and now you have some text, a nice big title.
No.
And I don't know, some more text there. And you have a little sidebar over here with some menu options. This is a wireframe.
First place.
I mean, sure.
Not bad.
It's a good, accurate description of Massimo, pretty much. Basically, all your wireframe is it's a nice little design on a piece of paper on a whiteboard so that you know and your team knows how you want to implement your website. Because especially if you're more than one person working on the website and you guys don't have the same vision on what you actually want to get done, you're going to end up with a nice page like this, and then you're going to end up with a different page that looks super different as if it doesn't belong in the website. So try and have a good design plan on how you're going to go about your website before you start. It's kind of the same way as you would write, as you would do a video. You need to write a script before you can do your video, because if you're making it up as you go, it's going to be a little weird. So think of the wireframe as your script, your storyboard, if you will. How a user is going to go through your website, and you kind of design the experience that way. Which leads me to the second point of wireframes. Plan out the website structure. So let's say you have your home page here, and then from the home page, you go to the other pages. So you have maybe a page about your team, a page about the robot itself, maybe a game, and give me another page.
Oh man.
Journalism.
Journalism, sure.
The
Yeah, the
About
journalism.
the tutorial.
Oh,
Yeah, there you go, tutorial. Perfect.
Wow, you guys read
So right now, this is kind of the basic structure for a website. So you have pages for different parts of how you want to tell the story about your team. You know, the team page we'll talk about the team itself, maybe list the members, talk about the robot, talk about how you're interpreting the game, maybe tie it into your theme if you have a good theme to tie it into. Journal describing how your build process went, and your tutorial, of course. So this is like an example of the basic structure. Now, if you want to break it down even more, you can have it. You can, I don't know, break it into the sub teams, like the different people that worked on the different components of the comp, etc. So this combined with your wireframe is how you plan out the story that your website tells. This is very definitely only one way of doing it. There's many others. Sometimes I've seen websites that will go and do it in like a story. So you go home, then the team, the robot, and the game, and it'll kind of like tell a story as you go through the different parts. It's up to you how you want to do it, but plan it out. The second part here, it's kind of like what we were talking about a bit. Pick a technology stack according to your level/personal goals. Technology stack is, again, like I said, WordPress would be a technology stack. If you have some experience in coding, maybe you want to try a little bit, challenge yourself a little bit, do some work with Laravel. I know that's what I did one year when I worked on the website. Well, made our own custom framework, but that's another story. You can write it in static HTML and CSS, which is the bare bones, like what the textbooks teach you. Or you can find another framework out there online that you want to use and try it out. It really just depends on what your programming level is at and what you actually want to learn from this experience. Because winning is fun, but getting something that you can take back with you into your future is even more fun.
Do I get a prize for learning?
Do you get a prize for learning?
Yeah.
If you learn things, you can say things in an interview.
I have a prize for winning.
It's called money in the future.
It's called like good things you can say in a job interview.
Only if you get a capitalist.
All right. So here's basically a list of the things that you really need to make a website. First things first, you need a programming environment. Again, this is more if you want to actually develop your website by hand. You don't really need this if you want to use like a existing technology stack like WordPress. Granted, it's a good idea to have if you want to make modifications in the future. Of course, you need a web browser. If you don't have a web browser on your computer, don't know what you're doing. A domain name, something like yourschooling.com or vanny-robotics.com or robo-crc.ca. And an internet connection, because you need to somehow get your website to the internet.
Why is connection in French?
Because this slide was made by a French person.
Hi.
Yes, Massimo.
How do I go about getting a domain name?
Well, I'm not too keen on the specifics if you choose to host with the CRC, which we can get into in a second.
Yes.
Actually, let's get into it now. So, if you need to get a domain name if you are hosting yourself. So, and you can do that by going to there's a couple major websites out there, GoDaddy.com, Namecheap.com, Domain.com. There's a few of them. You can literally just search by domain in Google, and you'll get like a bunch of good links. I recommend GoDaddy. It's the most reliable, but that's just me. Average pricing. But if you don't want to deal with that, you can choose to host with the CRC, which is new this year, which means you don't have to pay anything. You don't need to manage your domain. You don't have to worry too much about security, and we can install WordPress and set up the bare bones stuff for you so that you can get started on developing your website yourself. For more information on that, you can talk to Lydia, because I have no idea how that works.
Okay. Or talk to Jeff. That works too.
Or talk to Jeff. Yes.
If I choose to host with the CRC and you guys are giving me WordPress, going back to the tertiary level of like how many, like comparing me to somebody who made their website from scratch, is that just part of, like, is there an option to host with the CRC but make from scratch, or is
Absolutely.
it
The WordPress install is definitely optional. Like if you want to build your website from scratch and host it with us,
It's self-elected. You go into the control panel and you select install WordPress.
That sounds like
If
a
you'd
great
to go down that
We're
route.
using cPanel?
Unfortunately.
I don't want to start a debate.
Sounds like a great deal, Maxwell.
So yeah, it's you could choose what you install.
But by default, when you select hosting with us, you have a blank spot on the web and you can do whatever you want with it.
There's a little hole on the internet just for me.
Well, it's a subdomain, but yes.
Yes.
So let's just say like you make like I don't know websites, but like let's just say you do the framework by scratch and like you do like the whole page setup by scratch. Will that like points take into account if you use like a pre-set up framework? If I'm getting the term right.
It's ultimately up to the judges how they it's up to the judges and their opinion on it, but like we do kind of guide them in a sense, and the way I see it is the more work you put into coding, the more points you get for that.
Vanier last year, or was it 2 years ago, made a very special Flash-only based website?
That was
2 years ago.
That was
Pokemon, wasn't it?
That was 2010.
Oh, okay.
Wait, which one?
We're talking almost a decade
They made
ago.
it entirely out of Flash.
Yes, that was the
It's
Pokemon
glorious.
website in
Okay.
2014, I think.
Yeah. It's a while ago.
Yeah. Again, you could do that. That's totally cool. Is it recent
Is
technology?
it
Flash is
2.0?
going out of
No.
date.
Anyways, again, no need to start debates like that.
Make it all
But
in Java.
so, but to answer your question, it depends on the more work you put into it, the more points you get in that category, basically. So if you build the whole framework from scratch, design all the pages from scratch, that's great. If you choose WordPress, that's fine too. You just won't get as many points in that category. Yes.
I'm sorry, what is Flash?
What is Flash? You don't need to know Flash because you shouldn't be using it. It's,
No one
it's
should be
2019.
using it in 2019.
But basically,
But why shouldn't we use it?
Apple in 2008 said you shouldn't use it.
so Flash is basically it's an animation technology that was developed by Adobe a long time ago, and it used to be a big thing that was like YouTube, for example, like their video player. It used to be made in Flash because that was like the standard at the time. It's not very popular anymore, and actually most web browsers don't support it anymore either. Fun fact.
Very resource intensive on your CPU and slow.
Exactly.
Don't use Flash.
Like 2008 Apple
Yes.
said don't use Flash.
So is WordPress something like Wix or something like that?
Yeah.
It's like Wix, but it honestly depends. It could be like Wix. You have to install the right plugin and the right theme to make it work like Wix. It could also be like Laravel, depending on how you use it. Again, not starting debates here, but it could be.
Now what about Java for the web?
Please don't.
I want to live in
Any other questions before I go to the last slide? All right. So here's a couple tips. So the first one, it's what I was alluding to when we were talking about page structure. It's what we call the 3-click rule. Basically, any information that somebody wants to find should be accessible with 3 clicks or less. So for example, if I want to learn, if we're going back to this layout here, I want to learn about the team. Well, I go to the home page, click on team. Well, it's 1 click. I found my information. If I want to learn about the journal team, and we went with, or the journal, like read the journal, and we went with this structure, and the home page is here. 1, 2, 3, that's 4 clicks. So it works, but it's not as user-friendly because it took more time for the person to get here, and statistically, based on a lot of research, by the time your user gets here, they're going to get bored and leave your website.
Yeah, we should like home robot journal and then like home team.
Exactly. So that's a great way to lay out. It really depends on how you feel like you want to implement it, and there's, again, the story that you want your website to tell. But keep in mind the 3-click rule because it's a very common tool that's used in the industry right now to like assess user experience. Yeah.
How would you tell Lewis when like back-end stuff that you can't see for coding efforts? So you can't really, like from the front end, there's no way of telling if somebody used Apache or their own custom web server. And
You can tell.
You can honestly there's a lot you can tell by profiling a website. Again, I don't want to get into specifics because that's not the point of the tutorial, but there's a lot you can tell by profiling a website just from like Chrome's inspection tools. For
And
example.
if you choose to host with us, we see all of
We
your
read your
backend.
code. Yeah,
all
so-
your code.
Web page consistency. This kind of what I was talking about a bit before when I said do wireframes before. Doing the wireframes before you start helps make sure everything's consistent, because when you do your wireframe planning with your team, you're going to decide on maybe the color palette, the layout that's going to not change from page to page. Like if you go on Facebook, for example, if you're looking at a Facebook event or you're on your feed, that blue bar is always at the top, and you almost always have some sort of sidebar. That's something that you can decide while you're wireframing to have some consistency across your page that, okay, this is never going to change. This menu is always going to be on the side. I'm just going to change the picture and the content here as we change pages on the website. That's something that you could do to make a design consistent across your website. And like I said before, don't overcrowd pages with information. Now, you can make a page long. Scrolling's fine, but don't try and cram everything into that onto your screen. Use the scrolling to your advantage. Make other pages if you feel like it's scrolling too long. There's a lot of different ways you can manage the content from a single section. Just don't put too much text on a page because people won't be interested to read it. And also make your information concise, and keep in mind who your audience is as well. Like your audience for this is the judges, of course, but it's also potentially the people that are going to come visit the competition, that want to learn about your team, that are maybe too shy to go and visit your kiosk. Parents, yeah, exactly. So that's it. Yeah.
I heard this thing called version control. Can you tell me a bit about that?
Sure.
Work for a bank.
I mean, work for any software company that you'll get a version control. So if you decide to code your own website, I highly recommend using what's called version control. What version control is basically, let's say you set up your website, you set up the basics, and all right, you have a good platform and you want to save where you are. You're going to do what's called a commit, and you're going to give it a name. It's like initialize project. Let's say that's the name of your commit. And now you're going to continue on and do some changes. Let's say you're here and you do something and it breaks everything. You have no idea what you did, but you didn't do that many changes, and you just want to go back in time. You just reset yourself there, and now you have a version that you can go back to because it's like a save state. Think of it like when you're playing video games, or like older video games, and then you like save a version of your game before you go hit that boss because you want to be able to just like go back and redo that boss without having to restart the whole game. Think of it just exactly like that. That's your save game from that point in time. And there's different version control systems out there. The most popular and most useful one is called Git. It's literally a Git. If you're interested in looking that up, if you choose to do coding yourself, definitely look into that. But that's what version control is. It basically just saves your game as you go along when you want it to, so that you have different points in time to go back to, or compare to, maybe. There's a lot of good tutorials on Git online that you can read about. Any other questions? Yeah.
Should the website be accessible in the kiosk?
Should it be accessible in the kiosk? I don't think there's anything specific in the rules about it, but it's always been, like, at least for me when I used to do it, it was always a good thing that I would do to give your kiosk some interactivity. But it's not mandatory. It's a kiosk design choice at the end of the day. Any other questions? Doesn't have to be related to the presentation, it could be web design in general.
We may showcase your website pages, if they are nice, on a reel playing during the competition on TV screens in the kiosk area. Even if it's not in your kiosk, your website may make a surprise appearance, as well as scenes from your videos.
Are we going to put links to them on the website as well this year? I know I did that 2 years ago.
Most probably.
Yeah. Sure.
Okay. I didn't actually read all the rules, so I'm just wondering, when you finish your website, sorry, my voice.
Okay.
When you finish your website, are you putting that also on YouTube, like the video?
No, so when you finish your website, you're like, if you choose to host for us, example, we're gonna give you, like, you're gonna get a domain name, which is what we're talking about before. It'd be like, if you're hosting with us, it'll be something like,
It'll be
crcrobotics.com.
The abbreviation of your school name, if it's not something like Vanier. So like Bois de Boulogne would be bbb.crcrobotics.com.
There you go.
Or RTC.
Or RTC.
RTC,
Exactly. So you'll get something like that. It'll be like rtc.crcrobotics.com, and that's what that link, that URL is. That's what you'll submit. So you don't have to put it on YouTube or anything because it's not really a video. We just need a link to go and visit your website and play with it. And if you host it yourself, it'll be the domain name that you buy from GoDaddy or Namecheap or domain.com.
That's cool.
So you'll have a link that you'll submit to us through the form. Does that answer your question?
I've never done a
Okay.
website, so I'm not sure what I'm supposed to
So
ask,
if you-
so I don't know what I don't know.
I mean, so if you just in that case, I would recommend that you choose to host with us because it will make your life a lot easier. And once it comes time for submitting, if you're not exactly sure what to submit, like we can help you a bit with that. We can tell you, okay, is this URL that you need to submit since it's from your school.
Or we already have.
Yeah,
it.
Or we already have it.
Actually, don't even, you don't
We're-
even need to
if there's
submit.
help, if they're hosting with us, we're
Yeah.
not gonna know
Oh,
how.
You don't
perfect,
need to
even better.
submit if you're hosting with us because we already have the link to your website.
It's also fun for us because we see your website evolve.
Yeah.
So you're spying on
As you work, yeah. But honestly, if you don't have a lot of experience, the CMS in general, content management system, be it Wix, be it Squarespace, be it anything like that, or hosting with us and installing WordPress, is really the direction to go for this. Because it can be as complicated or as simple as you personally want it to be.
And there's also, especially for WordPress, that's like one of the reasons we give so many examples about it. It has almost like 8, 10, 15 million active users of it around the world. So there's bajillions of YouTube tutorials about it. You can just search introduction to WordPress and you will probably be watching YouTube for at least 15 hours and you'll become an expert. There's plenty of, granted you don't have to watch it for 15 hours, you can probably get the gist of it in like a couple hours, but if you really want to deep dive into it, there's plenty of content out there that will help you with WordPress.
I think the statistic is like 30% of websites on the internet.
Yeah, something like that, something crazy like
It's like
that.
a ridiculous number.
It's a lot because it's easy and there's a lot of information out there.
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
why it says PHP lifelong.
I mean, no.
If
it's
you-
not, but-
no.
If you put the two search trends next to each other, they correlate.
Yeah, there's correlations and causation.
Yeah, exactly. I love that. I love that phrase.
Yeah.
Big word.
Any other questions related to the web tutorial? No? All right. Well, thank you very much.
If you want to information on my website, look from this like Wix from 1992, and just have it be an
If it's involved with your theme, you might.
Yeah, if your theme is back to the
like